Welcome back to Light O'Clock and to the second episode of our mini-series on how we, as humans, interact with daylight. In our first episode, I sat down with my colleagues Anna and Priji to explore how factors like geographical location, climate, day length, and temperature shape our relationships with daylight. We heard wonderful snippets from their conversations with 4 interviewees from around the world: Rashaya, Andrea, Sophie, and Helga, each offering a unique perspective on thinking about and approaching light. And so today, I'm very happy to be back in the studio with you, Anna and Priji, to continue the journey and the conversation.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Great. So today, we will go beyond geolocation and cover 2 more of these bubbles that you guys identified as factors shaping our relationship with daylight: culture and behavior. And these 2 are very much interconnected, and so it's really hard to separate them, so we're going to group them together in this episode. So just briefly, what do we actually mean by culture and behavior?
I just want to add what we mean by culture. It's again a very broad term that we use, like the location in the previous episode. Culture refers to shared beliefs, values, practices, and in general, it's like a way of life with a group of people or society. So when we refer to the word culture as the culture bubble, it encompasses ideas, art, language, rituals, norms, behaviors, and social patterns within communities. And with the interviewees, we wanted to understand the sort of culture bubble in relation to, of course, daylight or light. Even behavior is a broad term in that case. And Anna can add to this because this is her expertise. In our context, we also wanted to understand behaviors that are related to interactions with light or daylight. So both these very broad terms, culture and behavior, both of these that we use it very specifically to relate to daylight or light in general.
Yeah, and so I remember, Priji, that we had this conversation, what do we even mean with behavior? And
Yes.
actually, it can be very easily defined, but you can also dive deep, I guess. But in general, I think in psychology, you can say behavior is defined as the observable and measurable actions that we exert, like reactions or activities of an organism in general, but I guess we're talking about humans here. Also in response to internal states like thoughts or feelings, but also external stimuli like the environment or social cues. And here you already see the social connection as well. So it's really everything an individual does, from simple reflexes and physical movements like running or eating, to even more complex social interactions and communications. And it really serves as a purpose, like meeting needs or gaining attention. And behaviorists focus on these external measurable acts, while cognitive psychologists, for example, link them more to the internal mental processes. And in our case, as you already mentioned, Priji, we really focus on how light might influence our states, our internal states, but also how we interact with these light sources. You know, switching on lights, using them for Christmas, whatever we do. And this is exactly what we want to explore. And I think maybe here you can understand now as well why this is so ingrained within our culture as well, why it's really hard to separate the 2. Right. So I think we will start with Rashaya, who talks about various communities and cultural practices in Malaysia around solar eclipse. And then this is followed by Helga, who will be talking about the Norwegian winter experiences with light.
When there's solar eclipse, we're told there's like a specific things that you're not supposed to do when there's an eclipse happening, especially when it's a solar eclipse. So you're not supposed to actually go and stand outside. You're not supposed to cook. You're not supposed to turn off the stove. You're not supposed to light up your prayer area. And there's also this really interesting thing that people in Malaysia, the Chinese community, whenever there's an eclipse happening, what they do is they take an egg and they put it on the tile and the egg stands. It doesn't roll.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's, I know it's got nothing to do with light, but like it's something funny that there's a lot of very niche cultural practices that takes place with the eclipse. And in the morning when we pray, we always, I think with yoga, we have sun salutation.
Yes.
Right? So that's something that's, the sun is actually a really central, it's very core, I think, in terms of spiritual practice for us. Every morning when we pray, and I think that links to what I do in the morning, we pay obeisance to the sun. We give thanks to the sun. We give thanks, like, thank you for bringing light yet again today and allowing us to, grow the crop. Because without the sun, we don't have food. So on the 14th of January every year, we have this celebration called Pongal. And it's basically a celebration of harvest. And it's also to give thanks to the sun. Yeah, to give thanks to the sun. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of cultural linkage between the sun and how we carry out or go about our day. Yeah, culturally, spiritually.
Santa Lucia, like, how do you call it? In English, you call it Santa Lucia?
I think St. Lucy.
St. Lucy, yeah. So that's a 12th, 13th of December. 12th or 13th, I think, or 14th, one of those days. This is more common in Sweden, but we also adapted it in Norway. That's actually super cute, nice tradition where the kids in kindergarten and the small school, the lower classes.
Primary school?
Primary school, yeah. They will dress in white and they will go around with candles, or it's not real candles, it's lights, but looks like candles. It was probably candles back in the days. When I was a kid, was it candles? Yeah, it was real candles when I was a kid. Yeah. And then they walk around and they sing the song for St. Lucy, and they have some special buns that are filled with saffron, so yellow buns. Yeah. So this is a very nice tradition, yeah. And what's interesting with this tradition is that it's kind of the Christian tradition of St. Lucy is adapted also to old, how do you call it, like a story from the like Nordic culture.
Yes.
And which is also, yeah, this with the Christmas in general is like, it's a lot about like changing of the sun not turning, solstice.
Yeah, because that's also a big celebration in Norway, I guess. Summer and winter solstice, or mainly the summer one.
Yes, that's Christmas, winter solstice is the biggest indeed. In Sweden, the summer solstice is really big. Also in Norway we celebrate it, but not as much as in Sweden. Yeah, in Norway we put a big bonfire, and it's nice festivity also. Christmas for us is kind of a celebration of the light. So Christmas is all about putting up lights everywhere. And that's both like those lights that you have in the garden, but also candles. And so we use a lot of candles the whole winter.
So I found quite funny what Rashaya said about the different things you're not allowed to do when there is solar eclipse. We really don't have this in our culture, and it seems very unfamiliar to me, actually.
Yeah, that was quite fascinating what Rashaya mentioned about the egg. I was also intrigued by the saffron buns that Helga mentions as a special for St. Lucy's. And, saffron is not a spice I associate with the northern latitudes. Rather, I associate it with the Middle Eastern cultures. So I looked it up, and apparently it is used for its bright golden color, symbolizes light during darkness. And it also tells me that light must be so precious because saffron is not a cheap spice. It is one of the most expensive spices out there. And the festival that Rashaya mentions, Pongal, which is a Tamil harvest festival and dedicated to the sun god Surya, is actually also marked by a dish that is called Pongal. Now, I have eaten Pongal, I've seen it, but now that Helga mentioned saffron bun, it's also fascinating for me to think that this dish Pongal, which is too sweet, there are two versions of it. One is a sweet and a savory version. Both have this kind of yellow or golden color as well. I don't know for sure if this is anything related to the sun or anything, but it was fascinating that these dishes also kind of relate to the sun or light.
Yeah, Priji, I was also very fascinated and intrigued when I first met some friends from Scandinavia. because they were really obsessed with saffron around Christmas time. It was a big deal for them. And that also really surprised me. And I also had to laugh a little bit here when talking about saffron buns, because I was trying to make this last weekend. And it was quite intense. I killed the dough because the yeast was not working and everything. So it was quite funny. But anyways, back to the snippets. I really connected with what Helga was saying about Christmas being a celebration of light. I was recently in Denmark and south of Sweden just now. It's December, so before Christmas. And I really noticed this focus on light. There were fairy lights really on many, many streets, if not all of them. And that really made everything a lot brighter since the sunset was really around already 3 in the afternoon.
Yeah, I really connect here so much as well, because I actually really love the dark nights in winter. I think I mentioned this in the previous episodes that I just really like the changing of the seasons. And so for me, winter is really a wonderful period with all the warm candle lights and Christmas lights everywhere. So yeah, I do really connect here as well.
You know, it took me a few years to appreciate the longer and darker evenings during winters when we moved to Berlin, and associated with this idea that you both mentioned about coziness and warmth that the candlelight and light bring. I was always in the mode of missing daylight till I found a way to appreciate the darkness. I was also really through the interviewees when Helga mentions these things, that also this idea that there is an appreciation for darkness. And once that switch in the mind happened, I was also very quickly able to do this and not miss daylight all the time, but look at the other side of the coin. So it is a similar cultural contrast that Helga observes in the next snippet, since she has lived in both Spain and Norway. She describes differences in the way the two cultures approaches light exposures and their intertwined behaviors. So let's hear the next snippet.
I saw a big difference when I came to Spain. I lived for 7 months in Spain, where as soon as, I'm for Norwegian, at least for Norwegian from Trondheim, where you very seldom see the sun. When the sun is out, you go out. And that's almost a rule. So when I came to Spain and I had my little baby who was quite newborn, and I would, in the middle of the day, when it was 30 degrees, go out in the city center as the only person, probably. People found it very odd that I would go out at that time.
Yeah.
But for me, it was but it's sun. I have to be out in the sun, of course, So this was very big and also interesting for me to see these differences, So my Spanish family, they would be at home and they would keep the, how do you call them?
The shutters?
The shutters, yeah. They would shut down, so it would be no light inside the apartment. They would not even turn on the lights. Or maybe they would have electric lights on, even if it's daylight outside. So for me, this was also super strange. So for me, it would be opposite. I would open the windows and to let as much daylight come in. But for them, it's about keeping the heat out, of course, which I also understood later when it got a bit too warm. So these things, I remember that I felt almost depressed by sitting inside in the flat when it was sunshine outside. So for me, it was a lot better to go for a walk, even if it was super warm. So in Norway, we believe that it's better for the kids to have fresh air, as much fresh air as possible. So the baby will sleep better in the fresh air. So to make the baby sleep in the day, you go for a walk, and then when the baby fell asleep, you leave the trolley outside. Even in the winter. Or it depends how cold it is. Yeah. Okay. But you will put a lot of clothes off and make sure that the baby is not cold, of course. And you will leave the baby out. It's even in the kindergarten that they leave the kids out. So I remember when my kids were actually in a Spanish kindergarten, but they adapted to the Norwegian culture and left the kids sleeping out when they had to sleep in the day. What people often do is that they, if they have not a terrace, but a balcony, they leave the baby on the balcony. if they don't have a balcony, they will sleep inside. So yeah, it's not that they will leave it down on the floor, like on the what do you call it, in the street, and you are up 5 stories up. When the winter I lived in Spain, I have never been freezing as much as I did that winter, because the houses are not isolated. So that's maybe also a coping thing. Like we always have it really warm inside the house, and you have when you go out, you have these really big winter jackets. So you're very seldom cold. Mm-hmm. So in Spain, I was really freezing. It was like, I remember like going to bed and they don't have this, like we had this big duvets, super warm, and they had like this small sheet. So, yeah. Religion is not very strong in Norway, but I think people get what you would get from going to church or a mosque, or you get that from the forest. You get kind of this, I think this spirituality thing is not that people are like thinking like, okay, now I'm going to go into the forest and be like, do my spiritual. It's more like, I think this, okay, in Spain on Sunday, they would go to the city center. Maybe they would go to the church, that would be like, okay, that's what we do on Sunday. In Norway, at least in the winter, you don't have that many hours of daylight. So you want to use those daylight hours outdoors and to get that recharge that you get from being in the...
And is it in the summer then?
It's kind of, it changes. You go walking instead of skiing or running or climbing. If you don't have like super stress at work, you would go out. Like in the office, if you have a sunny day, you would probably go and buy ice cream for everybody who's at the office, and you go out and you enjoy the sun. Indeed, yeah.
Yeah, so we heard from Helga and how she basically experienced these differences between Spain and Norway, and how she was freezing actually in Spain, which I think we would think is funny. But I actually have to say that I also had a similar experience when I was living in the UK. And during that winter there, or these winters there, I was really freezing. And people kept asking me, why are you so cold? Why are you wearing these hats and gloves? Because it must be much colder in Germany. Yeah, I think it is colder here in the winter in general, but it's also much drier, right? And so, having these sort of moisty winters wasn't really so nice for me, I have to say.
Yeah, and since I'm reaching you all today from the tropics in Kerala for this recording, I cannot help but highlight what Helga mentions about the dark interiors in Spain. I'm sitting in one such room where I have plenty of daylight outside, but the windows are small, the curtains are drawn. It's a very intense sunlight outside during the afternoon. And, warmer cultures that have plenty of daylight and sunlight outside prefer these dark interiors. They close curtains, they use shutters, or they have similar or smaller or etched windows, all of which bring less daylight and, importantly, less heat inside. So even me, who prefers so much daylight, now I'm very happy to be sitting in a room that is fully drawn in curtains and under electrical lighting. Yeah, so this was also such a contrast that Helga would have experienced, I imagine.
Yeah, I grew up in Italy, and there we really have shutters in every building. And so we close them basically in summer, right? To kind of like exactly how people do it in Spain, to keep the heat out. And so to this day, when I see a building without shutters, it looks a little bit naked to me, like something is missing. And so now we're going to hear from Sophie and their experiences with sun in Rochester, US.
I mean, Rochester maybe also because people are so excited to have the sun. But I feel like there's more of first of all, people don't really like the heat. And so they want to be inside where the air conditioning is, versus here, there isn't necessarily that same distinction. And so you may as well be out in the sun. And then also I feel like, at least among like people I know, there's more of like a consciousness of like being in the sun for too long being bad for your skin. And so I feel like there's sort of a shift in that direction, which I don't know if that's reflected here the same way.
Yeah, when you're at work. So where do you have your meals, your lunch?
Mostly indoors. We have a big table at sort of the center of our lab. And so usually anyone who's in that day will just sort of gather around that table. The last summer, we like ate outside a lot because we sort of have a little courtyard area with a few picnic tables in it that is more or less ours. No one else really uses it. And so we would go out there to eat. But this summer it's just been a lot hotter and a lot more humid. And so sometimes we'll like step out and then we're like, no, I'm going to eat inside.
Yeah, so that's a very interesting point about sun exposure and skin health. I don't know how much of this is culture-driven or personality-driven, but it's always very interesting to me when going for lunch, for example, with my colleagues, noticing individual preferences with respect to where people want to sit, like facing the sun directly or indirectly or being in the shade. And so we are always coming up with quite funny layouts for the lunch where the table is like half in shade, half in the sun.
Yeah, and when you compare Sophie's and actually also Rishaya's experience, I think it's almost, or it seems to me that it's almost the case that Norwegians never really get the feeling that the sun can be so hot that they would really dislike it, I think. Right, okay. Let's see how different cultures use clothing to adapt to their environment. And we will hear some impressions from Andrea first, followed by Sarah, who also lives in Singapore and was part of the focus group recording.
When you go out, do you notice people protect themselves against the sun? So do they wear like hats or sunglasses or something like that? Like,
yes, hats are really common not in the city, but there's a cultural thing about people wearing hats and sunglasses always. Like it's really, really common that you're having both sunglasses and your common glasses always in your pocket. Yeah, always. It's like the most common thing.
And in terms of clothing, would people wear long clothing, or is because it's warm, it's still, have a shirt? Or
I think it's a cultural thing that people don't usually are like wearing a lot of shorts or like I think most of that type of clothing it's on the next to the beaches and really outside the city. Like I think it's getting to change a bit, and I think it's a cultural thing. Like before, it was not well seen, so I think that's why, especially girls, didn't like intend to wear like shorter clothing. But now I think it's changing better, and there are more people that on the dry season are like more like this type of clothing. But usually clothes is really thin, exactly.
like linen or something.
Yeah. Linen and cotton, but thin, like really thin. Yeah.
Yeah, we carry umbrellas everywhere. So
In Singapore?
yeah, in Singapore. I mean, mainly for the rain, but also to protect us from the sun. So even when, maybe I'm being a bit stereotypical, but even when we were in Tübingen, when we were walking around, we noticed, it was a really hot day, we noticed only the Asians had their umbrellas out, and we're like, oh, okay, we're fitting the stereotype, but I guess that's like a specific thing.
Yeah, so I find it quite funny that some stereotypes, like the ones we definitely have about Asians always covering up to protect from the sun, are somehow really grounded in some truth, no?
absolutely. It's also easier to actually dress in a certain way when it has been culturally appropriated in a location. Now, even though I am based in a very warm climate with intense sunlight, I can imagine just standing out wearing sun protective gloves or hat here in Kerala. But if I would carry an umbrella for the sun, that would be a perfect fit in. But imagine if I carried an umbrella in the summer in Berlin, I might catch a few surprised faces. So this is also a good example of how location, culture, and behavior, they all influence and shape each other.
Yeah, definitely. The next section is also quite interesting. Anna, you asked about gender roles and differences in cultures and how it connects also a little bit to what Zara shared just earlier.
Depending on your culture, there might be definitely gender differences in how you are exposed to sunlight or you interact with sunlight. Do you know that from your culture, and can you describe if there are differences?
See, I grew up watching Teletubbies. So the sun is a baby.
Okay.
Have you seen like the...
No.
I strongly suggest for you to see the opening of Teletubbies.
Okay.
And the sun rises, and in the middle of the face of the sun is always a smiling baby. So like,
Okay.
but I don't know if the baby is a boy or a girl. Yeah.
Okay, and in your language, is there any gender? So when you
Yeah.
refer to the sun as
Yeah.
in your language,
Yeah.
does it have a gender attached
Yeah,
to that?
it's a male god.
A male god.
A male god. Suryan is a male god.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Whether you realize did gender play a role in how much you interacted with outdoors or daylight?
Yeah. Yeah, I just said it. Like, if you were a girl, it's like, hey, don't go out in the sun because you're going to get a tan. But they would never say the same thing to a boy, right? They would never say this to the male members of the family. And yeah, and even in beyond just, I mean, I'm ethnically Indian, so I see this behavior even in the Chinese, like in Singapore or in Malaysia. Even when they drive, they will wear hand socks. Hand socks, yeah. So it's like, it's literally called hand socks there. So they wear socks and then they wear a cap. Like I remember because I went to school with a school bus and you would only see her nose and her sometimes not even her lips, because she'd have sunglasses, a hat, the t-shirt, and then like the hand socks inside, a long shorts, like anything to avoid the sun. So that is a very typical Asian approach, I would say, to avoiding the sun. Like there's this aversion to the sun.
Do you think then, do women then spend more time indoors, or is that not the case?
100%. So especially those who want to preserve their skin tone, they do spend time indoors to preserve their skin tone. It's like so ingrained. It's so ingrained in the culture, like, you know, do not get a tan, don't get tanned, like don't go to the sun, don't go under the sun, you're gonna get a tan. Also, like I think with the Chinese community, they're afraid of getting freckles, like the sunspots. Yeah, so it's a very aesthetically driven reason why people avoid the sun, or specifically females avoid the sun.
You just mentioned the timing, so does it maybe also happen then you would go out at different times of the day then, so more in the sunset or
yeah, so I think it's usually sunrise, and like whatever you need to do outside happily, like intentionally, would be done in like sunrise and sunset, like that little window where you don't get direct sunlight. Yeah.
Does the sun have a gender for?
I kind of feel like it's male, but also that I feel like that's like traditional. So like part of me is like, no, I don't think it's, but it's like, that's like the thing I think of.
Yeah. So English is your first language?
Yeah.
Do you speak any other languages?
I speak French.
So
and like
French,
a tiny bit of German.
If you think in French now, would you then assign a different gender to the sun?
No, that would actually be more strongly masculine because it's le soleil. So, in German it's die Sonne. Interesting.
Yeah.
And you mentioned your mom did not let you out as kids, but is it a gender thing, or is it just for every kid they're just protective about the kid? And
I think, yeah, it must be as well gender thing. If it was a boy, then they wouldn't be so much of a problem. Like, but like, and in the city, like there's like this thing that it's not so secure in the city, but maybe a little bit outside, it's like much securer. So like I have family that is from Guanacaste, that it's in the Pacific North, near the beaches. And when I went to my grandparents' house, which was in Tilarán, that it's in Guanacaste, that was so different. Like I could go outside and play with my cousins and go in my bike and like run and go from tree to tree. That's something that is really common in Costa Rica. They climb the trees a lot, like even older people, and to get fruits and just to play. It's like really, really common to climb on the trees.
And in your language, does your language assign a gender to bird?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's male. El sol.
Growing up, this was my experience too. Being out in the sun during the day meant getting tanned or darker, and having a lighter skin was considered more desirable or aesthetically more desirable for girls. So there was always a bit of friction when I wanted to play outside, something I think the boys never really had to deal with. So then there is, of course, also the safety aspect that Andrea mentions, which is again more of a concern for girls or women to be outside rather than boys or men. And this is also, of course, based on where you live, a city or the countryside. And like Andrea mentions, she's able to play more in the countryside. In the city, maybe there's more caution to be outside. But all this comes down to lesser interaction with daylight for girls and women. We have this in the Indian culture. Rashaya mentions this in the Southeast Asian culture, and Andrea mentions this in the Costa Rican context even. So it really makes me wonder, isn't there a higher prevalence of vitamin D deficiency in women? I'm not sure about the studies out there, but this would be such an interesting thing to look into. It also really seems like cultural factors play a huge role in this, and because over time they shape individual lifestyles and behaviors.
Yeah, definitely, Priji, I agree. I just had to laugh a little bit when Rashaya recommended to watch Teletubbies. That was funny. But, jokes aside, I also find this association between tanning and light exposure very interesting. So the fact that, tanning is not considered appropriate for girls, and how this might then lead to gender differences in how much time women and men spend outdoors. I almost had the opposite experience, actually, during my childhood in Italy, because having a tan was considered very cool and looking pale was very uncool. And so the other thing that I also found interesting in these snippets was, to think how much languages like French or German, how much basically this can influence the gender that you assign to, for example, daylight or the sun. So, for example, I definitely think of the sun as masculine and of daylight as feminine because of my native language.
Yeah, this is actually a super nice example, Caro, for how psychology shapes our thinking, or how important language actually is, because it does change how we think about concepts as well. So yeah, that's just a side note. Right, so these were some reflections on gender from the individual interviews, but we also had asked this question in the focus group, and some very interesting points came out here as well. One person talked about the role of women in Iran, and the second person commented from an Asian point of view. So let's listen to them.
I'll give you Iran as an example, where for, I'm going to say religious traditional reasons, but anyway, you can interpret as you wish, the women tend to be covered in public, okay? But define public. And this is an interesting thing around outdoor, indoor spaces and private and public spaces. Do the two correspond? And in a traditional Iranian form, which is increasingly rare, by the way, in new build, but nevertheless, would be courtyard. And within the courtyard, the women would not be wearing a hijab, would not be wearing hijab, etc. It would be a family setting, but it would be outdoors. But outside the house, they would be. So the nature of clothing, the nature of display changes. Yeah, but it's to do with the private or public, not to do with the indoor or the outdoor, if you see the distinction I'm making. And that would play out in a number of cultures in rather different ways, and actually present some cultural tensions, because those traditional architectural forms were resolving some of the practical upshots of those prohibitions. Modern forms don't do that. And you've got tensions between the architectural form and the cultural traditions, amongst other things. So
Yes, I agree with that you said that women are not supposed to be tan ourselves with our skin. Like even until today, we are still having this beauty standard of being fair, being skinny, and being very pretty in our outlook as well. Like even that really prohibit us to go on some wild extreme outdoor activities, like for example hiking, or for example go for swimming in outdoor pool, or maybe go to some paragliding, or for example. So these are some of the activities that if we really try out by ourselves, we'll be judged by elderly, or well, maybe the society as well. Yeah.
So yeah, again, we have this association between light exposure, tanning, and beauty standards coming back here. And in the next and final part, we will take advantage of the focus group comments again, this time specifically on cultural differences. And so you will see that we come back a little bit to the seasonal differences that we already talked about in the first episode, so the last episode on geolocation. But first, let's start with a concept that we think it's well known, yin and yang. Is it really what we think it is?
I think, like, for example, in the Chinese culture, all of us might have heard of yin and yang. Mm-hmm. So yin really represents like daylight, positive, warm, really a lot of heat as well. But yang is more like darkness and cold, calm a little bit. But in this philosophy, there's always a need for a balanced approach between yin and yang. Of course, you cannot have too much of yang, and you also cannot have too much of yin. That's why you have this very nice, well-balanced approach of the logo between the white and also the dark.
I did not actually know yin and yang meant both. I know happy and sad, but I'm not associated with sun and darkness. So yeah, it's good to know.
If I can just share my personal experience. So I come originally from Poland, so it's continental Europe, and you have much more defined seasons. And when I moved to the UK, everything is kind of blended in my mind, because I grew up thinking that winter is really cold, and summer is hot but short, and then spring and autumn, these kind of transitionary seasons, which are beautiful. And the whole kind of literature in my country, in Poland, and the cultural heritage is all kind of around the seasons, the harvest, the poems, the songs. So we kind of, you grow up anticipating now spring is coming. These are the first signs of spring, snowdrops, and you get these connections with the books you read when you were young, and then when you go through summer, you kind of learn certain practices. You celebrate the warm days, and then you have harvest time in autumn and the winter. Going towards the end of the year. So and you do have your kind of brain is set into these 4 blocks with different weather patterns, and so in UK is much more mild and fluid. But then it's still interesting how actually people who were born in the UK, they also treat these seasons as quite distinct, but to my mind they're much more fluid. Mm-hmm. And to me, like, winter is not really winter, typical winter. But when you have one day, which is kind of a bit of a frost for people who are born in the UK, it means it's really like freezing winter time. So it's also the culture kind of baggage we have around the seasonality and what it means. It's quite strong, and it kind of stays with you, and you always have these references around these phenomena.
Actually, Czech Republic, the origin, but I lived for quite a period in Bali. So the impression I had is that if you are in Bali with this very daily pattern, but not really different patterns over the year, your dominant rhythm you have is the day. It's much shorter. In Czech, the dominant rhythm what I experience is the year. So the days are kind of not that important. I mean, it's there still, but you experience the changes across the seasons. And it's a very different approach to feel the time
because in Bali you have it's pretty flat, so you don't see the year pass. But in Czech, my grandma, I think it's very as well connected with the age. I can see my 90 years old grandma. She cannot wait to see the first flowers for the spring, and she cannot wait to get the sun. And it's getting more and more prominent over the age. So the old people are seeking for the sun. They really need the heat and the bright and so on.
I think living in Denmark is like one of the biggest contrasts that you can have with like winter and summer, especially in winter. Sometimes we only have a few hours of daylight, not even sunlight. It's just gloomy and gray outside. And if you have that for a long period of like months, you really look forward to having the sun. So I feel like in Denmark, we really love the sun. Like the moment the sun is out, everyone is out of the apartments, people drop their work, they go to the park, they hang out outside, and it's super nice. You can really feel like the city come to life. And we also have a lot of parties around it. So I think a lot of Scandinavian countries celebrate Midsummer, like the summer approach. And then in winter, Christmas is huge also because it's so dark. They want to have a lot of festivities to cure seasonal depression, I would say. So we have St. Lucia, where you celebrate the lights. So everyone goes out with candles and it's very nice. And so I think in Denmark, they really need these celebrations in order to get through winter. And then finally summer is there. And then we are always outside. So it's really big contrast, I think, from like America or Asia. Regarding like cold being a barrier, I think in the Netherlands, but also in Denmark and Sweden, there's the rule that the weather, you can dress for the weather. There's no thing as being too hot or too cold. Like you just put on an extra coat and you go outside no matter what. Also in Denmark, like in winter, the babies all sleep outside because of the fresh air. And they're all puffed up in like really big like suits because it's so cold. And like you said, in the Netherlands, you also had to go outside as a kid at least, I think, 45 minutes a day. So 30 minutes. Like around 12 o'clock and then 15 minutes later in the day.
Within the school curriculum or schedule that you
go outside. Yeah, so you eat fast, go outside, and then if it was raining, then you would just like stand outside under like a little roof waiting until the 30 minutes were over. You could go in again. But I think it's like very nice way to push people outside and taking the fresh air. I think it's cultural. I think everyone had to do that. I've never heard that anyone didn't do that. And I think regarding like babies sleeping outside, that's like a cultural thing. It's like not mandatory, but you see it. Yeah, if you go to a cafe, you can see the stroller standing outside and just like a baby sleeping in there. And you're like, where is the mom? And they're just sitting inside knitting and drinking some tea. So it's really funny dynamics to see that. Yeah.
Interesting what the person said about the seasons in the UK. As I said earlier, I also lived there and I also share the same feelings that I found them to be not so extreme compared to Germany. Although I think it has started to change with the climate change as well, unfortunately. But I remember vividly that my favorite season was spring in the UK because there were so many bluebells covering the woods, which is really not so common here in Germany where I live. And so, yeah, it's really nice. I also found it interesting that Denmark is actually similar to Norway and Sweden culturally. I guess to me, maybe Denmark was a bit more similar to Northern Germany, but that's just a sort of prejudice because I don't know so much about it. But we also heard from one of the participants in the focus group describing the babies are left outside, that they celebrate Midsummer and St. Lucy's and so on. So very similar to the other Scandinavian countries. Yeah, so culturally and in terms of appreciation of the sun in winter, they seem to share a lot of similarities with these other Scandinavian cultures.
Right. Yeah, Anna, I can relate to the spring in the UK being such a wonderful time of the year where you start to see the first flowers and you're like, yes, we made it, people. We're on the other side. Yeah, and I think another comment I have on these snippets is that it's always very interesting to see how the patterns that we're used to from our childhood are really kind of the reference for everything else that we experience later on. In this case, for example, the seasonality that was mentioned. And so related to this, we will now also listen to some other snippets and kind of go a little bit back in time and see what some of our interviewees remember about their childhood and being outside in daylight.
Just to add, Caro, this was one of the most fun conversations we had when we asked our interviewees where they played as kids and whether they remember the spaces, features, and experiences that stayed with them. We were really interested in understanding cultures and behaviors that shaped interactions with daylight or being outdoors, both as adults as well as children.
I play a lot out in the garden and forest and by the fjord. We had throwing stones in the water, like we would swim, of course, and those kind of things. But we would also remember, for instance, in the spring when there had been ice and things not in the water, but on the shore. And we would be playing, jumping on top of the ice and trying to break it. And yeah,
dangerous games.
No, but in ponds, not on in the fjord right? But on the side, and putting food, pieces of food, that came floating, that are torn by the water, and we'd be playing with them, and yeah. There was no way we could stay inside. No matter what weather, we had to go out. Oh, yes. I don't remember complaining about it, but I did remember my own kids complaining about it. And yeah, but that's indeed a thing, yeah. The cabin that my family has, when I was a kid, it was like this. So you would go out and take water from the, how do you call it?
Yeah.
I don't know what it's called in English.
Yeah, well.
Well, yeah. So you have a well outside and you take water from there, and there was no electricity, so you just heat it by wood fire. So it's like having this simple life out in connection to nature. That's kind of the idea with this cabin life.
I like to stay in my room and read a book.
It's hard to talk about this type of places because I think my mother was really conservative, so she didn't like that I go outside a lot because of the security. She thought maybe I would get a problem or something. But now that I see my nephew, that he is 5 years old, he loves to go outside. It's his favorite activity. So always go to the park. And there are a lot of parks. So you can go to the park, and there is the playground, and there is all of the stuff. There are always machines to make exercises.
And outdoor gym.
Outdoor, yeah, on the open air, almost in every park there are. And there are public spaces. So he goes almost every day to the outside.
Yeah, so sorry, but this makes me laugh so much. And it's brilliant because this is so human, right? So Helga is going on forever about her childhood and playing outside, and Sophie, they just want to read a book. So we differ, right? We all love different things. And while Helga was just going all about outside and so on, I just love books. Right, in this section, we will take a little look into differences relating to schools. So asking about schools, whether they remember the spaces, classrooms, or routines, was another way we explored the cultural and behavioral aspects that shape how kids interact with daylight at younger ages.
So this would be you had short breaks, 15 minutes, where you had to go out and get fresh air, and then you also have a longer break that was a half hour. You eat lunch in the classroom, and then we go out after it.
But then you have to go out.
I think it's to be able to kind of refreshen the head, kind of. Yeah.
I went to this a Steiner school from 2nd until 6th grade. Yeah, it's a pedagogical concept theory, whatever. And it's very sort of based around natural things. And so all of the buildings were wood.
Yeah.
And so the outsides were painted sort of different colors. I think some of them were red, and then we had a blue one. But on the inside, the wood color was all very warm, kind of yellowy brown. And so I don't really remember the quality of the daylight coming in, but I remember that inside the rooms, it always felt like a very warm quality of light just because of the wood that everything was reflecting off of. And all of our desks were similar sort of light brown wood. And so it felt a very warm environment.
And was there enough windows that it was naturally lit, or do you remember
these classrooms that you had to switch on your electrical light?
It depended on the building, because one of them that you were in when you were in older grades had like a big like overhang on the side, which blocked a lot of light. So those, I feel like we had the lights on more, but the younger grades didn't have that same thing. And so the light could come in more directly into the windows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And where did you go to school? Like when you describe these classrooms, which part of the world are you?
So that was in the outskirts of Lausanne here.
Okay. So it's a Swiss, it's sort of a Swiss classroom.
Yeah. And it was at like the top of a hill that was very like wooded.
Yeah.
So it always sort of felt a little bit like we were in a separate world when we were there, because we could go on walks in the forest and it felt like there was nothing around.
Yeah.
So there was a big yard with wood chips and various like wooden play structures that we had. I would definitely play, but I feel like when I got a little bit older, I would also be like bringing a book and sitting at recess and like reading my book instead of everyone else would be like running around, and I would be like, leave me alone.
Where was this favorite spot that you read your book?
There were like benches along the building, some of which were definitely under this sort of like awning area. So again, not really direct light, but there were also just like logs, like big tree trunks around that you could just sit on. So I feel like I just kind of like picked a spot based on how I was feeling. I don't think there was really a specific like one spot that I would return to.
Yeah.
Well, there was something that when we were still in the US, and then for a little bit when we first arrived in Switzerland, I went to a Montessori school, which is another pedagogy, whatever. And they have this like tradition when it's your birthday that they light a candle and place it on the floor. And then the birthday kid holds a globe and you walk around the candle like as many times as it's your age to like represent the number of times you've been around the sun with the candle. And then you like get to go like blow out the candle.
That's beautiful.
At the end.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Which I think was just really lovely and always sort of stuck with me.
Yeah.
And even when I stopped going to that school for a little bit, like my parents would still like have me do it at home and just like put it on the dining table, and I would just walk around the table.
Nice comparisons and a very important topic, the schooling. And we will explore this in our next episode when we will be talking more about the built environment.
Yes, schooling is such an important topic. We spend so much of our childhood in schools, and every schooling system is different. Routines, classroom design changes based on location and culture, and that also shapes how we interact with daylight at younger ages. So when I grew up in the Middle East, where it was really hot again, we had air-conditioned classrooms that were electrically lit. We had an outdoor morning assembly. And looking back at this morning assembly, it's surprising how intense the heat could be. And heat strokes were something I would see fairly often, in fact, with someone feeling dizzy or even fainting. Then we had what was called as the games period, which was just a 30-minute chance to play and be outside if we wished to. And I'm guessing, Anna, Caro, your experiences was very different from mine?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, we had kind of warm days in June, but then school would actually end mid-June. So I don't have like memories of being very, very warm in school. But I do remember having quite a long recess after lunch in a very Italian way, I think. I think we had like in total 2 hours of break, like including lunch, but it was very, very long. And during this time, we mostly played outside. It was not really a mandatory thing, so it's not like all the kids had to be outside, but I think we just all really wanted to be outside. Also because we really wanted to play dodgeball. This was our main game.
This is really nice, yeah. And in Germany, it depends a bit on where you live in Germany, actually, because different countries within Germany would have different times when we end school for the summer break. In Bavaria, we actually have quite long summer schooling still, so until the end of July. And so I remember very, very much that during July, we were always hoping that we would get free because it was too hot. So we call this hitzefrei. And everyone was hoping for it every day. But it doesn't happen so often, actually. But actually, with the climate change, the summers become warmer, and it should happen more often that school starts, or actually finishes earlier, but because of other constrictions like legal things, this has basically disappeared now. So there isn't something like, leaving school early because of heat actually these days.
Yeah, that's very interesting, Anna, like the climate change comment and how that actually should affect how we think about schools. But anyways, I don't want to give too much away about built environment in schools because we'll come back to it in the next episode. And so let me just do a little wrap up of the episode. So through interview snippets from people coming from different countries, today we discuss cultural traditions around light. So remember solar eclipses and Lucy's Day, Christmas lights, but also how clothing, safety, gender norms, and beauty standards all affect how much people go outside in daylight. We also touched a little bit on spiritual meanings of light and I would say cultural traditions, childhood memories as well of playing outdoors, and differences in schools and routine that actually shape how early daylight exposure really is already during childhood. So yeah, thank you guys again for another fun episode. And listeners, tune in for the next one on the built environment.
Super. And so to round up this episode on cultural differences in behavior, we will listen to the focus group and how different languages refer to daylight in their own language.
What is the word for daylight in your language?
Tageslicht.
Polish would be światło dzienne. I'm actually thinking because it's quite a scientific term. We just say światło, which is light, lose light.
That's more the common.
Yeah, we don't use like daylight, the word daylight, yeah. So we have two words. We have światło, which is light, and we have sun, which is słońce. And when we say sunlight, we just say sun.
I think this is a similar thing. In Czech, we have denní světlo, which is daylight, and světlo, which is light in general term. We have slunce, the sun. So my mom, when she tells me go out, she said, go out for the sun. So běž ven na slunce.
I think mainly light, sunlight, and then I think fresh air is somehow incorporated in that.
In Dutch, it would be daglicht, which is quite similar to German. And I'm thinking in Danish, I think we would just call it lys, which is just light in general.
I think in Brazil would be luz do dia, daylight, but we don't use that much. I think we use more ar livre, which would be fresh air.
I was trying to look up what the Irish word for daylight is. And, because I couldn't think what it was, there isn't one according to... so there you go. There is not a specific word for daylight. There you go.
But then there's something for sunlight.
Light, it would be light, yeah. There'd be a word to say it's light, but not in the specific term.
En español, luz natural, like natural light. Y luz día, but I think that's more like when you're working with daylight.
In Italian, I think it's either luce del giorno, so light of the day, or luce naturale, natural light.
In Chinese language, it's called yang guang, means sunlight, and if it is just light, then it's guang. So remember the yin and yang. Yang is like sun, so yang guang means sunlight. Yes.
In Malay, daytime would be siang hari, and if you're talking about light, then it's either sinar or cahaya. Right? Cahaya would do, yeah. So you would say, this is a bit more formal, but you would say cahaya matahari. Matahari is sun, yeah.
I think that in French, it's a bit like in Italian, you know, it's like lumière du jour, day of light of day. But I think the interesting part is that when we want to go to the sun, you know, like we say prendre le soleil, so take the sun. It's like we literally grab it and take it. But we don't really have a specific word, like one word to say daylight.
Say that in Italian it's the same. We also say to take the sun, prendere il sole.
When we want to say, we use the diminutive, not slunce, but sluničko, when you can feel the emotion, go out to take the sun. But it shows actually that you love it.
So also like when you said in Brazil, we also have a saying in Polish, idź na świeże powietrze, go to fresh air, which means get some daylight in a way.
So it's fresh air more than light in the sense, yeah.
Yeah.
I had it to look up, but in Denmark it's actually called dagslys, which is also daylight. So it's not only lys. So that's nice to know.
Yeah, we have tomar sol or banho de sol.
For the sake of completeness, I looked at, finally found a dictionary with it in, and solace and lay, which is actually just light in the day. But I can tell you it is not used. Yeah, you can do sunbathing. There is a Northern Irish phrase, get your head showered kind of thing. Yeah. Which is getting outside and getting fresh air, actually, not. So there are those kind of phrases, but we tend to be slang words, if you know what I mean. Yeah. Which you name no more.
Yes. I think there are more slang words in Ireland about like getting soaked and other words.
You have been listening to Light O'Clock. This podcast is produced by me, Caro. The podcast team includes many of my amazingly supportive colleagues and lab members. Manuel Spitzchen does the scientific fact-checking, and music, mix, and sound design are done by Ingo Bednarek. Show notes and additional resources are created by Maidel Fernandez Alonso and myself. Our social media team includes Lucien Bickerstaff, Nilufar Tabande, and Zara Alkaf. And Anna Magdalena Billa is our test listener. Light O'Clock is a podcast produced by the Translational Sensory and Circadian Neuroscience Unit, and we are supported by the Circadian Mental Health Network, the Viscom Prize from the Deutsche Gesellschaft für Psychologie and the Deutsche Gesellschaft für Psychophysiologie und ihre Anwendung, the Max Planck Society and the Max Planck Institute for Biological Cybernetics, and the Technical University of Munich.